I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about judging in martial arts. This is another topic that very few people know too much about, but a little bit of background on me is I've been a student for almost 20 years now, and when you get up into, say, the black belt ranks, oftentimes you become a judge at many of the tournaments and things that are being held, and they train the judges. Obviously, they teach you the different signs and symbols that you need to make, but the amount of detail that they go into is really incredible, and it gets right down to even the scores that you are allowed to assign. So for example, the school that I used to belong to a number of years back, there was a rule that if you were judging a pattern, for example, you couldn't give a score less than 5, for example. You just couldn't give less than 5. So if somebody was in the tournament, they showed up and they couldn't complete a single move in their pattern and couldn't do anything, the lowest score that they could possibly get was a 5. The highest score that we were allowed to give was an 8. So, very arbitrary, right? But think of that narrow range. The lowest available score that we were allowed to give was 5, and the highest score that we were allowed to give was an 8, right? And this is presumably out of 10. So of course, when spectators are watching this, spectators don't know this because they're not judges and they don't go to the training, so they don't know the stuff that we're being taught. So when they see people getting a score of 5 or whatever, it's not a great score, but it doesn't look too bad. So it's like, he did his best, he got a 5, or this person got a 5.5. Not too bad. In reality, that was the bottom, or that was as far down as you can go. But in the spectators' minds, you could have got a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, right? So in their minds, well, you're better than that. So, and then of course the 8 out of 10, the mentality or the philosophy of the school was that there's no such thing as a perfect pattern. So that's why they never gave out a 10 or a 9. So that was their philosophy, that there's no such thing as a perfect pattern, and if you give out a 10, you're implying, the implication is that that is the best pattern that you could have ever done or that could ever be done, and that can't happen. There's always room for improvement, so therefore we're not going to allow you to give out 9s and 10s. You can't go any higher than 8. So what was the end result of that? Well, that means that you had an extremely narrow range to pick from. You had 5 to 8, and you were allowed to give half scores. So 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, and 8. That's it. Those are the only available scores. So what happens then, right? The first competitor comes up. What are you going to give them for a score? It's the first pattern that you've seen that day. You don't necessarily know whether it's a great pattern or a bad pattern. It was okay or it was average, so what are you going to give them? Well, guess what the judges would give them? 6.5, right? You're going to get 6.5. If you're the first competitor up, chances are you're getting 6.5. Even if that was the best pattern that we're going to see on that particular day, that's your score. Why? Because when the next competitor comes up, you have to have room to move up or down the spectrum. You have to be able to go lower than that score, and you have to be able to go higher than that score. So all these things, all these hidden rules in judging that most students never know about, never learn about, and that most spectators never learn about, they have a great impact over who wins in these tournaments and what scores you ultimately get. I don't want to say it's predetermined, but a lot of it is very tightly controlled and very determined. So depending on where you are, obviously if you're the very first competitor that comes up, that is a tremendous disadvantage because a judge is going to be reluctant to give a very high score on the first competitor because what happens if the next person is a little bit better? If I give the first guy 7.5, let's say, and the next competitor comes up and does even better, I've only got 8 to go, and now I'm already at the top of my range. So if another person comes up and they're even better than that, I'm stuck, right? Like I'm dead in the water. Now I'm giving duplicate scores. And oftentimes that's what would happen at this school, is many competitors would get the same score over and over again, and you could see differences in the quality of the pattern. One was clearly better than the other, but they're all kind of winding up with the same score. And that's how you get there. That's how that kind of stuff happens. So think about that when you think of judging in martial arts, or you think about judging in any kind of competitive sport. Always realize that the judges are trained to give particular scores, and it greatly impacts what you're going to get as a competitor.